Hey everybody, we are Robert, Martin, and Francis, and this is Snakes and Otters, pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready, we're about to live in your head rent-free. Welcome back to Snakes and Otters, listeners. I'm Robert.
I'm Martin.
And I'm Francis.
And this week we are back to our Code of Honor episode, our favorite words of wisdom, sayings that we like, things that we like to live by, or just things that we think are just funny as hell.
Oh, yeah.
Just depends. So this is episode 42. The answer to life, the universe, and everything. So this has got to be a good episode because it is the answer to life, the universe, and everything. So, what is... Let's see, Martin, I believe you had something really big you wanted to start with. Was that not true? Or do we want to start with Francis? Because I'm going to go last.
Well, I'm willing to
because I'm in the captain's chair. I can do that.
Right.
But I think you're right. This is going to be quite the episode because Francis just filled all of our glasses. Woo doggies. He filled them all right.
Thank you, Andy.
That's right. We're back with some 1792 again.
That's
from
right. The great folks at Blackout Bourbon.
Bourbon.
We're still
So
staying with
this
that.
was not 2 fingers. This is about 6 fingers worth of bourbon. So this is going to be a good episode. We're going to be fueled up. But thank you, Robert. I did want to start. And my quote today, let me give you some setup. It's from the film The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Excellent.
So, starring, of course, Clint Eastwood, Lee Van Cleef, and Eli Wallach. They play Blondie, or the man with no name. Lee Van Cleef plays Angel Eyes, and Eli Wallach is Tuco.
In the role of Tuco, I believe it says in the credits.
Yes. And directed by Sergio Leone, and I'm going to give him credit as a screenwriter as well. And this comes towards the end of the film. It is a prequel to the other 2 Man with No Name spaghetti western films. Few dollars more.
And a fistful of
And
dollars.
A fistful of dollars. I'm sorry, you got it done the right way.
Fistful of dollars was first, and then for a few dollars more.
For a few dollars more. A fistful of dollars is basically Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo.
That's correct. We're going to eventually be talking about samurai movies in the cinema, and that's going to come out again.
Yeah.
Because it was a direct steal. Leone lost the suit over that.
Yes.
But it's still a great movie, both of them are.
The first spaghetti western, the first Clint Eastwood Man with No Name film is lifted.
To put it politely.
That's putting it politely. It's a direct steal, yes.
Yeah. But this is actually the 3rd film in the trilogy, but it is a prequel. It's set during the Civil War. All 3 men are on the trail of a cache of Confederate gold in a cemetery. And they have the big 3-way gunfight, which Clint Eastwood as Blondie wins by killing Lee Van Cleef's Angel Eyes. Mm-hmm. And he has a bit of an advantage in the gunfight in that he has already emptied Tuco's gun. Unbeknownst to Tuco.
That's right.
That does help you win.
So he already knows he only has to beat one guy. He just has to beat Angel Eyes. And the line is, it comes at this point, and the line is, you see in this world there are 2 kinds of people, my friend. Those with loaded guns and those who dig. So that always strikes me as a line that I try to keep in my mind for a couple of reasons. On one level, it's not all that different from just the Boy Scout motto, be prepared.
Yeah.
In a different way, but
or keep your powder dry. I think
keep your powder dry.
That's a good one.
Is a Royal Navy thing, right?
It is, that's
keep
correct.
your powder dry. So on one level it's that, but on another level, it's also a statement about that a people with freedom to arm themselves are full citizens. And those without are not.
Are subjugatable?
Yes. And so in thinking about this quote and doing a little further digging and research and a couple of things in my brain, here's another way of saying it. Any unarmed people are slaves or are subject to slavery at any given moment. If the guns are taken out of the hands of the people and only the pigs have guns, then it's off to the concentration camps, the gas chambers, or whatever the fascists in America come up with. One of the democratic rights of the United States, the Second Amendment to the Constitution, gives the people the right to bear arms. However, there is a greater right, the right of human dignity that gives all men the right to defend themselves.
Human dignity. You know I love that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
That's Huey Newton. So not too many people, are in between, or well, I guess that's the wrong way to phrase it, but that puts
Huey Newton and
Clint Eastwood, and that makes for
They're both saying the same thing, and they both come from completely different positions.
yes.
Well,
There you go, Francis. That's a better way to say it. And also, I'll again, I'm quoting, so I want to apologize. And I don't ever refer to members of law enforcement as pigs, but I wanted to give the quote verbatim
Right.
from Huey
Of course,
Newton.
that's right.
So, the thing I like about this quote that you've chosen is that it has a lot of philosophical depth. And, we love the philosophy.
We tend to go there, don't we? That's what makes our quotes so good, usually.
Yeah. So, this concept that there are two kinds of people, those who have the guns and those who dig. That's also, to me, my first take on that is that it's a warning.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
It is
cautionary
a warning.
tale.
Because if you don't have power, because essentially it's about those who have power and those who don't. And I take it as if you let those with power, and in today's world we tend to think of that as the state. And generally speaking, for the 20th century and the 21st century, that's true. Prior to that, that might have been individual regimes. They might have been monarch-based. Might have been generals like Napoleon.
Plantation owners.
Well,
That's another great
there's
example
large
of it.
power, and then there's localized
small power.
Yeah.
So, or just corrupt governments. I mean, you look at who was the corrupt governor in Louisiana?
Huey Long.
Huey Long.
Huey Long.
Or even a Bull Connor.
Bull Connor. Yeah.
You're talking about somebody that had power over, again, what Huey Newton's talking about. Those were the fascists that he's responding to.
Well,
Exactly.
And that kind of goes back to the feudal system, too, because that kind of localizes your corruption.
Right. And if you have the weapons, whether it be swords or guns, you can then systematize and legalize, and by legalize I mean write the laws, to keep those with shovels in
Digging.
keep them digging.
Well, yeah.
And you may not even let them have shovels, because shovels can be dangerous weapons too.
Well, yeah, that's the heart of feudalism. That was the
Exactly.
intention. Yeah.
Exactly.
It was those who
You
have the
can-
might.
That's
make
how
the right.
Russia had serfs. That's how there were the peasants in medieval Europe, because they became tied to the landowners. So it's not just who has military power, but who has the ability to own things. Has a great deal to do with that. If you can own something, that's a bit of power unto itself.
Yeah, well, then you're obliged to defend that, too, if you own it.
Yes, because if you don't, you
And
won't keep
you have
it.
the right to as well.
You are really onto something, because that's another piece of this for me too. Is property ownership is the heart of freedom.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
It's the beating heart. If you are not permitted to own property, there is no freedom. Essentially,
You have feudalism.
yeah.
Or something similar. Or
the-
communism.
People wouldn't think it today, but that is something that is enshrined in church teaching as well.
Yes.
Is that the ability of a man to own his own property, to own his land, own himself, is very much an important part of how we look at humanity.
That's right.
It's why there is dignity in work. Because the implication there is that you own the fruits of your labor.
Yep.
Because if you don't, there's no dignity
Yeah.
in that.
That's right. In a free society, surrounded by others who do the same.
Yes, that is the implication. There's a society of free men
Right.
who can own property and use that responsibly to take care of those who can't take care of themselves.
Correct.
And it's, I have this perception. Perhaps I'm overplaying it, but our modern world seems driven towards pushing people into the cities.
Yes,
into
absolutely.
apartments, making the people landless.
That's been going on since the 1870s,
Yeah.
since the Industrial
But I think
Revolution.
it's only been recently that populations of cities actually has now exceeded the
It's a tipping
population.
point.
Yeah, hit that tipping point. So I just feel like that there's an acceleration of pressure that when there's so many restrictions on banking, so many restrictions on loaning, that it just feels like there's this a stronger and stronger drive to not just make us landless, but to push us to where some kind of regulated entity owns where we live.
Well, it's not even it's not just that. This drive, whether it's intentional or not, the result is that economically, well, we may have a great deal of say where we choose to work because we can apply where we want to, and that's a free exchange. They want to hire us, we accept the job. But that's just it. It's a job. We are driven to become employees, not owners. That's where the church has the biggest problem with modern capitalism, because we do not practice a pure form of capitalism, although a former pastor of mine would argue that what we have is the result of pure capitalism, because big business creates big government, because it uses big government to stay big business.
Yeah. Economies of scale tend to be self-perpetuating.
They do. Teddy Roosevelt would probably look at the modern society, how so few corporations control so much, and want to know, where the hell are the trust busters?
Right. Which, he slayed a few of those dragons before.
He did.
And yet they have repopulated.
Right. They have managed to work around the laws so that legally it is to our benefit, because it's the easiest path, to choose to be employees, to choose to dig the ditches.
Yeah.
So they may not be guns, but we're still
Yeah.
digging the ditches.
But if you take a person's property away, push that person into an apartment that's owned by a bank, that's regulated by the government, then guess what? The government gets to decide how you live in that apartment.
Yeah.
But here's to breaking up Disney. Since it feels like Disney owns everything right now.
Feels like it, but it's really, entertainment-wise, they're certainly the big dog.
I mean, as soon as they buy Sony, then they own everything, right?
Pretty close.
Well, Warner Brothers owns a great, huge piece.
Yeah, Disney will never be able to buy Warner Brothers because they will never be able to own Marvel and DC. I just don't think
You
that'll
say
happen.
that.
What? Oh, that would set the world a turning. Can you imagine Superman and
So we
Spider-Man
need some-
together? Take me away,
Oh,
Calgon.
then a one-shot. They've done that.
Well, I know, but
Yeah.
it's not the norm.
Right.
I'm sorry. Take me away, Calgon. I don't want any part of that.
So yes, we definitely need to find some enterprising lawyers that want to take on Disney and break up that that entertainment monopoly.
Yeah, but it's a great. It sounds like a cheesy quote on one hand, but there's so much depth and truth there.
Yeah, it's just this cool Clint Eastwood line. He has
Right.
this whole cinematic
It's
history
not
of
a
all
gun
these
nut
great
thing.
things, but there's two kinds of people: those with loaded guns and those who dig. And boys, make sure you all are the type to have loaded guns. That's the only way to preserve your freedom.
Yeah. Amen.
Wow, that's deep. Okay,
You nailed it
Francis, that's a tough road to follow, but
It is.
I think
Yeah, because I started with Clint Eastwood, and then I ended up at Huey Newton. So you got some ground to cover here.
Well, I'll tell you. Well, I'm
big shoes to fill.
That's right. You went really well with that. I'm gonna steal from a movie as well, from the '60s actually. And I wasn't sure I was going to do this until you kind of got into this. I realized this is a very good quote. You remember the movie Lawrence of Arabia?
Love it.
Yeah, wonderful movie. Sir David Lean. It's still considered one of the greatest motion pictures ever made. And part of it was, well, there's 1,000 reasons why.
Yeah, cinematography
Is
performances,
unbeatable.
all of them.
It was Peter O'Toole's first movie. It made him a star. But it was well written. And there's lots of pieces in it. It's pretty historically accurate. It's pretty character accurate for Lawrence, T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia. And there's a moment in the movie, early on, where Lawrence is basically stranded in the desert. It's very early. And he encounters Omar Sharif, a very young Omar Sharif, who plays Sharif Ali is the name of his name. It's over a well that Omar Sharif shoots another Bedouin tribesman who was going to take water from a well, which he says is his. And Lawrence witnesses all this. And they come into this argument, and it's so amazingly well done. And there's a quotation that Lawrence makes. It's about the Arab people at the time, but I'm going to extrapolate it and make it about all people. But he says because of this, the fact that Ali would shoot a man for trying to take water in the desert because he owns the water. He says to him, Sharif Ali, As long as the Arabs fight, tribe against tribe, so long will they be a little people, a silly people, greedy, barbarous, and cruel as you are. That quotation comes back later when Alec Guinness, who is Prince Faisal, uses those same words again back to Lawrence, explaining, so you think we're this. Let me explain to you that we're not. And that's kind of part of the story. But that quotation, so long as you're fighting against each other.
That's a huge part of the backstory of that World War I campaign.
That's correct.
In that the Europeans see them all as Arabs.
That's correct.
All the same. But the Arabs see themselves very differently.
That's correct.
And very tribal.
Lawrence gets that.
Yes.
And and the audience gets it too, because as I said, this is early in the movie, he recognizes these are not a monolithic people like we think. They are extremely diverse, and what's worse, it's their divisions that has kept them digging. To use your terms.
Sheriff Ali is Harith,
Uh-huh.
and Abu Tai is Hawitat.
Uh-huh.
So I've just actually watched some of this movie, so it's tremendous.
I picked a good one to pick from it.
It's eventually what splits them apart at the end. The Arab Council, when they marched into Damascus, and this part's not terribly historically accurate, but Allenby, at the head of the British Army,
Right.
on this campaign, they've gone through Jerusalem. He kind of lets the Arab army beat him to Damascus a little. He's giving Lawrence a little bit of leeway, even though the Sykes-Picot agreement is already in the bag,
Right.
which is going to divide the Middle East up amongst all the European powers. But he's trying to give Lawrence and the Arabs a little bit of breathing space to try to set up this united Arab state, butting up against what is the butt-end remnant of the Ottoman Empire.
Right.
And the tribalism eventually undoes them.
Exactly.
They can't get it together. The telephones don't work because the generators have burned, and now there's another fire, and there's no pressure in the water hoses. And Lawrence says, well, then you carry the water. And the Arab says, my tribe does not carry water.
Mm-hmm.
Damascus is basically going to burn because they can't get it together enough.
They cannot get past these preconceptions that they hold so
About
dear
the other tribes.
about the others. And ultimately, this is a argument against tribalism and partisanship.
Yes.
And that's kind of why I think this is such a great quotation, because it reminds us, as citizens of the world that we live in today, and you can take that at any time and any place, but ultimately, the reason we fail at the things we fail at has a lot to do with, as you say, we can't get together. We can't get our shit together. We're too worried about us versus them to ever accomplish anything meaningful.
Well, I was wondering if you were ever going to get there, because, I mean, don't get me wrong. All the backstory was very interesting. But I'm sitting here thinking, I hope they get to it, because otherwise I'm going to have to do it.
Not off yet.
No, right. not off, but...
No, I was getting there. Because it's important
to me, that's the heart of that message. It's not so much, that happened 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So, yes, that's important. Because, what it sets up for the 20th century. But there's a lesson there, and that's the whole point of Code of Honor.
Right, yeah, exactly. This is not a historical lesson on what happened then.
This is a lesson for today. And we see it played out in American politics especially. But we're also seeing it still being played out in European politics.
Sure.
And we're seeing it played out in the Middle East and in Africa. We're seeing it played out everywhere. And it's never going to go away entirely, don't get me wrong. But the dangerous thing is when it happens within one country.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that's where we are today. Ironically, we were just lamenting this before we started recording this episode about how we've gotten into this we talk about this a lot on this show. You go back enough times, I'm sure you can find it 2 or 3 times, about how you don't make deals with the devil.
Right.
And that's part and parcel of that's exactly what's going on in this movie around this quote. They don't make a deal with the devil
other as the devil. That's
exactly.
right. We don't
demonize another tribe. There's no way to make an agreement.
That's
exactly. Right. And so American politics are this way, and I think a lot of it has to do with that identity politics, which is tribalism. It's exactly what it's trying to do. It's
what
a different name for it.
Right.
And when it gets to the point where the tribalism is more important than the cultural identity, because realistically, now I'm sure there are lots of differences, but there's a bigger shared culture there than the tribalism is willing to recognize.
Well, yeah. They are their own worst enemy in that.
Exactly. Well, and we are too.
And we are too.
We have a huge shared culture in our country, certainly in Europe. And yet, when we dilute that without enriching it, and see, that's the difference. Mm-hmm. We used to assimilate and incorporate and embrace all three.
Yeah.
Things that came to this country from other countries.
Right.
Whether the Irish brought them, or the Italians, or the Germans, it doesn't matter.
Vietnamese, Chinese, whatever.
We don't do that anymore. Now, and whether it's right or wrong, it's just a symptom. I'm not passing judgment on whether it's right or wrong. There are multi-language government forms to account for everything. And while, yes, I laud that in some ways, it's a symptom of a bigger problem in that we are encouraging the differences rather than encouraging the unity. Uh-huh. You can still have differences and be unified. Irish and Italian and Chinese, all of those cultures retained a lot of identity. And that's what you may think, well, how different are the Italians and the Irish and the Germans? Well, when each group came to this country, they were pretty damn different.
Yeah. That's right. They were all persecuted.
That's right. And so, same thing with the Chinese and the Japanese when they came, and yet, anybody that's different this happens to, but eventually they assimilate, they incorporate, and it all gets embraced. Yeah. Who doesn't love Chinese food? Granted, most of the Chinese food we eat in this country is not really Chinese food.
It's very American.
I get that.
Yeah.
But we think it is. There's a way to embrace the differences without making the differences the only point.
Well, that is the essential definition of tribalism.
Yeah.
It's a negative word. It's intended to be, we circle the wagons and only, we ghettoize ourselves. Only our way is correct. And implicit in that is your way is demonized.
Yes.
And there's the problem. We don't live and let live at all.
It's funny how tribalism is a negative context, but at the same time, today, assimilation is a word that has a negative context.
Right.
And it shouldn't.
It's tied up with cultural appropriation.
Yeah. It's like there's nothing wrong with liking Chinese food. I mean, that's not cultural appropriation. Snakes and Otter's favorite restaurant is a Chinese restaurant owned by a Thai woman.
Right.
That's right.
There's nothing wrong with it. Just, embrace these differences. But I think also, at the same time, there's a difference between sovereignty and tribalism.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sovereignty is something to preserve, while at the same time, if there is a common goal, set aside the tribalism.
Yes.
Well, that's what this quotation is talking about, is that if you want, you can only achieve anything for good if you work together.
Right. The smaller the group that you limit your working together with, the smaller the good that you can achieve.
That's exactly right. And that's what Lawrence was saying in that quote.
The sovereignty issue is, I think, another key thing. That's something you're seeing in Europe, where sovereignty is ceded to some of the groups that have come into in France and Great Britain especially. There are no-go zones for police. There are places where, and again, it just happens to be that it is about Arabs or Muslims in general, that Sharia law, not full Sharia law, but there are Sharia courts that have been allowed to adjudicate cases outside of the national system. That is an attack on sovereignty. Now, and I'm not passing judgment on whether or not the Sharia courts or Sharia law are good or bad. I don't happen to think they are, but that's not the point.
And you
are embracing a different authority inside your country.
That's right. In a civil matter.
In a civil matter,
These are not religious issues that are done on their own and that don't carry penalties.
Although there is, but for a Muslim who is for Sharia law, it's the same. There is no difference.
Right.
Yeah. And, you know, Brexit's not tribalism.
No.
It's a sovereignty thing, while at the same time, if there is a common goal, I think Britain could still work with the rest of Europe. Just because you have your sovereignty doesn't mean you can't support combined military efforts.
They're still part of NATO.
Like yeah, still part of NATO.
We aren't part of the European Union, so and we can work with them, we can trade with them. Mm-hmm. So there's no reason why they can't. And maybe it would be a different thing if they were part of the continent directly. But being an island nation, it's a little bit easier for them, I think, to be able to do that. So, wow, that's a...
I mean, yeah, it's very interesting, you know, the mind of the people. Perhaps you can read too much into this, but the mind of the people seems to be, at this moment, very much a sovereignty place. The Brits are in a place where we want our sovereignty back. I think you could say that in popular politics today in the U.S., it's about sovereignty. So I think it is, you do have to be careful that doesn't spill into tribalism, but I do think it is a separate impulse.
I'm not... Can you give me an example of how you think in the U.S. is sovereignty? Because I'm not entirely sure I follow that.
Well, it's the desire for immigration restrictions.
Okay.
Is a sovereignty issue.
Honestly, I don't know. I think that might be more of a tribalism thing. Wanting to keep... It's probably both.
It's a little...
Yeah,
it's going to be both and.
This is a Trevor Slattery thing. It's complicated.
It's complicated.
It's complicated.
That's true.
It is. It's a fine line that...
Because, yes, there is the issue of the border control. A sovereign nation has to be able to control their borders.
If you don't have a border, you have no sovereignty anymore.
Yeah. But on the other hand, you are very explicitly excluding brown people of a certain faith. That always looks bad.
Yes.
Well, because it is bad.
Well, if that is the reason why.
That's correct. That's right.
Especially if that's the primary reason why. I don't know if that is always the primary reason. I think it does have a lot to do with it in a lot of groups.
For some it is.
In a lot of groups.
Yeah.
Not all.
Populism walks that tribalism line. It just does.
It does.
And I think it does a disservice to all of us.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's why populism has rarely had its moment in U.S. politics.
Yeah, never any sustainable ones.
Yeah.
It usually is an ugly moment when it happens.
Yes, that's
correct.
The know-nothings in the 1800s.
Absolutely.
It's just... It's a very dangerous thing because...
Well, we tend to side with the sinful side of ourselves, and it's never a good thing when we do that.
Oh, wow. That is...
Thank you.
Perfect. Because that's going to tie into the quote that I have.
Well, lay it upon us, sir.
Yes, it's your turn. Go for it.
So, this is one I put on my list. It was kind of a joke because we used to say it as just as a funny thing. But more and more, I've come to embrace this because it has a philosophical truth. And I'm going to use the word liberal in this quote. But I do not mean this as a political liberal. I do not mean Democrats.
You mean as defined as that which someone who allows stuff?
Well, not so much that, because it is about talking about embracing the sinful.
Right.
A liberal philosophy always has, at least partially, at its core, something about my freedom.
Okay.
Okay? And that is very, very much at the core of democratic politics over abortion. Yeah. Freedom, you can't tell me to do what I can do with my body.
Right.
But it's also at the core of conservative and Republican economics. You shouldn't be able to tell me what I do with my money. Okay? Those are both very liberal philosophies.
Right.
Politics aside, they're liberal philosophies.
Right.
Classical liberalism.
Classical
There's
liberalism.
The word.
Yes.
Okay.
So again, those are trigger words, and I'm trying to.
You are your own person. You are not the property of a sovereign.
Right.
Is classical liberalism.
Right, and I'm not saying that classical liberalism is a bad thing because these are very much truths. Because abortion aside, if I can't do what I want with my body, in other words, if I can't go where I want to go, work where I want to work, marry whom I want to marry, that's a serious moral issue. If I can't choose what I do with my own money, what I want to spend it, again, assuming that it is not illegal, and that I am not harming someone with it, and so on and so on. Yes, those are very good and proper truths, but they're also very much extremes the way they're expressed. So again, I just want to get out of the way that I'm not talking about political liberalism.
Gotcha.
Not directly, but you can also take it there. So a liberal is someone whose interests aren't at stake at the moment. Now, we used to laugh about that when we were younger.
Who says it?
It came from a poster I had.
Okay.
It was about Republicans. It was Republicans and had all these different quotes on it. And got it back, I don't know, I think it was in college when I first got it, back when I was much more into politics than I am now. And that's something that's always stuck with me, but it's also stuck with me more and more as I am more attuned to philosophical meanings. Because it is so true. The very definition of a liberal is someone whose interests are not at stake at the moment. Because as soon as your interests are at stake, you want to conserve them.
Well, that's very true, yeah.
It's at the heart of that is what you were talking about. We always choose the sinful when we were talking about the tribalism.
Right. Well, tribalism does. I don't say...
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I'm talking about the tribalism. So that is a dangerous thing.
Oh, yeah.
Because if we only care about the issues when our interests are at stake, that is an outgrowth of the tribalism, and it also feeds the tribalism.
That's right.
Because we only have common cause with those that have common interests. That is, by definition, a form of tribalism.
Yeah. We are no longer our brother's keeper.
Correct.
To steal from Genesis.
Right. A full-on libertarian is the most liberal of philosophies that there are. Now, most libertarians would hate me for saying that.
Well, because they're reading the word liberal differently.
They're reading the word liberal, but philosophically, they would be the most liberal, because a true libertarian would say, I don't want you in my bedroom, I don't care about abortion. If I don't want one, I'm not going to have one. I don't want the government messing around with my taxes. They should leave me alone and let me do what I want on my land. All of these things, those are personal interests, and they only care about them when they're endangered. And that's part of our problem today, is that the things that we care about are only the ones that we have a personal stake in, it seems. And that's a dangerous thing, because we no longer see that other people's concerns are valid. And that's the biggest problem.
We don't look beyond ourselves.
In other words, we can have honest, true disagreement on what we should do about something, because we come from different places sometimes.
We should be able to.
We should be able to. That's
but
right.
we don't anymore.
Well, I would
very rarely.
Yeah. Well, those that do so, I believe, are the true visionaries. They are often shouted out and marginalized because they lead to compromise and solutions. And I don't think we want that. I think we want the Colosseum. We want the blood
We
sport.
want to win at all costs.
That's correct.
Again,
Arms raised in victory. That's all we care about.
when things have become personal, which is at the heart of this, the liberals is someone whose interests are not at stake at the moment. It's all personal. And the moment it becomes personal, I could give a flying
Don't say it.
rat's ass about you.
Thank you. I mean, I'm the only one that's broken the F-bomb before. Let's not make that another
But
one.
I really wanted to, because that really,
It does work, yes.
But that's at one time I would have embraced this politically. That the liberals is someone whose interests are not at stake. From the sense that, well, of course, that means that they're for socialism and communism and free stuff for everybody. But on the political right, you see the same thing.
Sure, absolutely.
It's just different issues.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I weep for my country because we are all liberals. There are almost no conservatives philosophically. I don't mean big C conservatives. I mean philosophically.
Yeah. And it's super tough because at some point, are there any solutions left? There may not be solutions. Sometimes I feel like, I think it's a H.L. Mencken thing. It's the point of popular politics is to present the public with an endless series of hobgoblins, each of them imaginary, so that the public is clamorous to be led to safety. That's not completely the.
Well, it's almost like.
But it's like, are there any real problems to deal with in a nation this prosperous?
Well, obviously, yes, there are.
Yeah.
Sure.
But the question is, how many of them have been artificially created and perpetuated?
Exactly.
How many are those hobgoblins, as you say?
Well,
I mean, there are real problems, but the hobgoblins are real, but it's...
But government causes a problem, and then we look back to government to solve the problem.
Exactly.
And
never let a crisis go to waste.
Yeah, at some point it's like, you know what? I think as P.J. O'Rourke says, when are we done?
It's like Emma said, don't we have enough?
Yeah, it's like, when are we done? Sometimes it's good that Congress is deadlocked. They can't screw anything up.
Well,
and it for someone like me, guys, listeners, I'll just mention, not only did I bring up a Clint Eastwood about guns and a Huey Newton about guns, I wore my Second Amendment shirt to the recording session.
I almost mentioned that, yes.
So, yes, right here, the actual text of the Second Amendment is on my chest.
And it's not that long.
Neither is his chest.
Nice one, Centurion. Liked it.
Sorry.
Props, dog. Props. Props. I gotta love that. When you get smoked that bad, you just gotta kind of say I love it. But at a point, a person like me feels like he's being pushed to extremism. On one hand, I feel like I should be in the mainstream. I'm just a regular guy. But I feel like sometimes, because I do take the Second Amendment seriously, it is kind of my issue. And I do sometimes feel like, wait a minute, when did I become like an extremist? And I have to remind myself, I'm not.
You're not. You're
absolutely not. I'm just...
If you're an extremist, it's only because the center has moved so far in the other direction.
And I really don't think it's that. I think
it's been artificially pulled.
Exactly.
I didn't mean that it was an organic movement.
Right. I think that there's an attempt to make it seem as if it is, but I do not believe that it is. I believe that your beliefs are far more in line with what we would call Mr. and Mrs. America today than some of the truly extreme ideas that we hear often spouted about. Which they make the news feeds because they are extreme, because they do promote the blood sport and the Colosseum.
Well, because it bleeds, it leads.
That's exactly it. That's all they care about, and that's why I am extremely jaded and skeptical when it comes to the news media, because I think they serve only themselves.
To a large degree, that is true, but I think they also serve a certain philosophy. Mm-hmm. Political philosophy.
That is correct. That's right.
Well, for the most part. I mean, each media outlet serves its own political philosophy. Although I think all of them are coming closer together than they used to be. I don't think Fox is that different from the others anymore.
Yeah. They're all, the Democrats accuse the right of having an echo chamber, a conservative echo chamber between Fox and Rush and all. But both sides... They're essentially an echo chamber.
They are.
When one of them says it, then they all say it on both sides.
Yeah, and I think they miss the point that most of America is not what they think it is. It's not what they hear on Twitter.
Well, it's not even just. It's not just that. When I go back to what started this discussion of this quote is this, and I think partially it's the echo chamber. I mean, maybe that has a lot to do with it, but. The echo chamber, no matter what it is, because even on the right, there are segments of echo chamber, as there are on the left.
Sure, absolutely.
Because you could look at the current candidates on the left, they each have a different slice of that party in many ways. Although some of them are fighting over the same slice, but there's some fairly defined segments that they're fighting over. You saw that 4 years ago in the Republican.
Sure. Every time that you do not have an incumbent, that's going to be part of the process.
I mean, I think you could take this whole slate of Democrats that's running right now, and 15 out of the 16, if you took their faces away and their names away, you wouldn't be able to tell from what they say who they are.
Right. You're going to have some that are going to be...
They're echo.
They're not. Yeah, they don't echo exactly the same thing, but you're going to say, this group does this group echoes this. So, I think that the danger, where we have gotten to because of the tribalism and because of this thing about our own interests not being at stake, is that our interests are the only ones that matter. Our interests are the only ones that are important. Our interests are the only ones that are moral. Our interests are the only ones that should matter.
There's that magic word.
And if our interests are the only ones that should matter, everything is personal.
Yeah.
That's why when you disagree with someone today, you hate them.
That's right. You're demonized.
It's just a simple statement. I disagree with this philosophy or this political stand. Why do you? It's like I love potatoes. Really, why do you hate broccoli?
Yeah, we've talked about that before. It just strikes me that everything's this fine line.
Yeah.
We talk all the time about defending the individual. Because if you protect the individual, the group takes care of itself.
That's right.
There's no need for tribalism.
Yeah, that's right. Tribalism is often the
at the same time, if you push that too far, then it's sinful and it's selfish.
There's a difference between protecting the individual and promoting the individual. And I think that's...
the tyranny of the majority is still the tyranny. Yeah,
it's in some ways, it's become the tyranny of the minority. It's just about 1,000 of them.
Yeah.
It's a tyranny of 1,000 minorities, or however many.
Balance is everything.
Certainly.
Everything in moderation.
Except moderation.
But at the same time, I always dislike fence sitters.
Yes.
It's like at some point you got to come down on one side or the other. But our system is geared towards moderation and compromise. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. It is absolutely designed to produce compromise. That's the whole point of the delegation of powers.
That's right. It's considered the only just solution because that way you really want everyone to win. They may not win completely.
Compromise doesn't have to mean everybody loses.
That is correct.
Yeah, everybody gets a little something that they want.
Right.
That's the intention
of all. Yeah.
That's how it's supposed to be done.
And that's not where we are anymore.
That's right. Very few people recognize that.
Yeah.
And that's again. So my interests are the only ones that are important. Screw yours.
Well, we've done a really downer of an episode, guys.
No. We stood up for the individual.
Okay.
We stood up for the sovereignty of a nation.
Uh-huh.
We discounted tribalism.
Yeah.
We condemned strongly selfish, self-centered behavior.
Yes.
We mainstreamed Huey Newton.
We did.
We did.
We had two great movies.
We had two incredible films. We've been all over the place in this episode.
We have.
But you know what? Once again, all three of these went together extremely well.
Yeah, it's amazing how we managed that.
It's stunning on the surface of it, but it all went from one thing to the next to the next.
Who has power versus who doesn't, to tribalism, to self-interest.
Yeah.
Wow.
Funny how we do that.
Well, we're just that good.
I'm going to say again, our heads might not fit back out the door.
Well, even blind squirrels
home.
find the nuts every once in a while.
That's true. Even a snake or an otter can find a...
That's right.
Right.
So, gentlemen, raise our glass. One final time, 1792.
Yes.
Episode. Excellent job. And so, Francis, what do we have coming up next week?
We're back to our heroes next time. We did one on Ulysses S. Grant a few months ago, and we said we can't not do Sherman. And Martin jumped us and says, I've got to do that one, I've got to do that one, I got to do that one. So you're going to captain that one. But we're going to actually go back, new subject, completely new subject. We're going back to the Civil War. And we've got some Civil War stuff planned for later in this year, so we'll be doing a lot of this time. This is kind of a primer on that. Is William Tecumseh Sherman. Let's talk about him, because he was a very polarizing figure. He was a very well-known figure. And I don't think we know him as well as we should know him. That's our premise. So join us next time. We'll be talking a lot about that.
Thanks for being with us here every week at Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Be sure to spread the word on your social media accounts. Follow us and retweet us. We are on Instagram and on Twitter at Snakes and Otters.
Let your friends know that they can find us on Podbean, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. Just search Snakes and Otters Podcast to find us, and please remember to leave us your comments and reviews. It helps people find us.
And you can always send us an email at snakesandotterspodcast@gmail.com.
I'm Martin.
I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis. Catch us next week. Same snake time, same otter channel.